So we want to welcome folks on who are joining us on Facebook and also in our Zoom originated live feed. I'm Joe Brooks, founder and director of Community Works Institute, and I want to get off the proverbial stage here and introduce our host, Zach Ritter, who is a deeply valued colleague of mine, and we've done some great work over the last number of years. Zach has a lot of positions. He's a juggler, and a social justice juggler. And you're a Jedi, by the way, but that's another conversation. I'm not sure if is that new to you, Jedi?
It is new, but I'll take it.
Tori turned me on to that. It's justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion.
Oh, I like that.
It's a thing.
That's awesome.
I never heard of it until Tori mentioned it. So welcome, fellow Jedis. And our very exceptional special guest today, which is why we're here, Anthony Emeka. And Zach will do a great job of introducing Anthony. And Anthony can, I think, take us where we're going to go today. But we're basically focused on connecting people. That's what Community Works Institute is really all about, via teachers, schools, teachers with students in the classroom, and community-based educators as well. That's what we do, that's what we're about, and we help teachers through summer institutes, and spotlight series like this, virtual conferences and seminars, come up with better strategies to advance their work to connect students to the community. If ever there was a time that's important, it's now. I think we're going to be analyzing the fallout, the effect from these COVID times for a long time. But I do think that one of the things that I've certainly experienced in the virtual realm over the last, 10 months now? Mm-hmm. It's hard to keep track, but what I've experienced is a lot of things are possible now for all the challenges, all the issues of equity, on lack of equity on full display, all of it. There are a tremendous number of things that are possible now that were not possible before. Mm-hmm. And that would include connecting with educators and resource organizations and a lot of the partners that we work with across the country and around the world, where it was possible before, but now it's imperative. And so I'll leave that as my opening remark. Thanks so much, Zach Ritter and Anthony Emeka, for being with us today. And I'll step back and let you properly introduce yourself. Zach, give people a little bit of context on you, because you're an interesting guy.
So yeah, social justice juggler, going for the jugular. I like it. I'm Zach Ritter. I am an educator. I'm a dean of students. I've been writing some op-eds. Got a PhD from UCLA in higher ed. And then I go play tennis and I meet interesting people. And this is, Joe Brooks does a lot of work with ethnography, and this is ethnography in action. So I was at tennis and I met Anthony Emeka, and we immediately hit it off. We just started talking about history and politics and race and what's wrong with this country and how can we make it better, and what's wrong with the world and what's right with the world. And so I thought you should be on the show for sure. So I want you to, introduce yourself the way you would like to, but you're an educator, you're a builder, you have Reset, Rethink, the podcast that I was lucky enough to be on. And okay, great, Facebook live streaming. And you've worked in the business world, you've worked in corporate America. So
I have.
Tell the people who you are.
Yes, I'm a lot of things. No, thank you for that, Zach. Thank you, Joe, also as well. Super excited to be here. I kind of see my life kind of in two different spaces. That's kind of the formal, professional, what I do during the day, and then it's kind of the other part is also just who I am all day. So they blend, of course, but there's a different faction over here. In short, I am a people connector. That is my calling. That is who I am. I connect people. Related to that, I build communities. which is something I've consistently done throughout my life, whether that be in a professional capacity, a personal capacity, for business, for myself. And lastly, I'm a consultant, which is, being able to leverage a lot of the knowledge that I've acquired over the years, the experience I've acquired over the years, and really put it to good use for great corporations, for small businesses, for individuals, and really focusing on the operations and strategy, and specifically how that relates to DE and I work.
Mm.
And one thing I'm actually leaning into a little more is really helping professionals navigate the workspace
Mm.
as we continue to evolve. And now we're working from home, as Joe so eloquently pointed out. A lot of different things are arising. It's like, how do we communicate? How do we problem solve? How do we address differences and issues and challenges that arise? Because we're in a space that we've never been in before. So I think that's super high level who I am. Specifically, as you know, I'm from Los Angeles, did my undergraduate at UC Berkeley, lived in DC most of my professional life, where I worked in the nonprofit sector, largely in the project management space, doing operations and strategy, before going off to business school at the University of Toronto, where I, again, focused on strategy and business design, which is really my forte. And throughout that career, I've had the opportunity to work with some pretty large organizations and agencies that have very much shown me things that can be done better. I'll say that. That can be done better. And one is namely working with the Securities and Exchange Commission. If you know anything about working in the federal government, it's a challenge, it's a beast in and of itself, but working with a huge agency that has so much oversight and has so much impact on people's daily lives, the regular people's lives, totally different beast in and of itself. And most recently, I was working with Comcast in Philadelphia, doing some operations consulting, and very, very similar experience. Also, very different experience working on the private side with a Fortune 50 company that has a very different set of challenges. That, at least in my specific department, in the area that I was working in, just very different, And so, but it's fun, it's exciting. I'm able to take those experiences and leverage them into the consulting work that I do.
Hmm. Hmm. Some of the conversations that we've had, we talk a lot about where the world is going and then what's the issue. And you often aptly put, well, white folks are going to white, right?
I mean, yes.
and it's true. And for folks that maybe don't quite understand what that means is, if you want to put it in another country's context, the dominant group is going to dominate or
Absolutely.
be defensive, right?
Absolutely.
And so you've really worked in corporate America, and I think a lot of educators that work in higher ed and K through 12 oftentimes see the corporate world as a place that upholds the status quo, upholds white supremacy, and all these bad things that we want to dismantle. Did you find that to be true in your experience, and what kind of made you pivot out of it?
Well, that's kind of a two-part question. So please remind me of the second part. I learned in my choral fellowship, never ask a double question because people will only respond to the latter part of the question. So I'm just gonna throw that out there that I'm gonna forget the second part of the question. But let me start with the first part, which is, did I see that in corporate America? Does it exist? 100%. I think white seems a little different in corporate America, although they're the first to rush to release statements of, we stand by Black Lives Matters, and we believe in diversity and inclusion, and we believe in equity, and this, that, and the other. They have more resources to put that information out there. They have lots of money. They have millions of dollars. They dedicate budgets to this to ensure that people see their brands and see these experiences and companies in a very positive light. You know who doesn't have that money? The federal government. You know who doesn't have that money? Nonprofit organizations, small businesses, et cetera, et cetera. So as much as, these larger corporations want to promote this idea of D&I and how they're ahead of the curve, they really are not. Oftentimes, they have a department that is separate from all the other leadership departments. They have a smaller budget, and it's a lot of lip service. And unfortunately, that lip service only goes so far. And I think if you talk to a lot of individuals who are in that space, in these corporations, in the DEI space, they can talk about a lot of those challenges and how hard it is to get anything done. One of the biggest things is oftentimes these corporations have a DEI department that is separate from all the other departments. If we were truly committed to DEI, we wouldn't have it separate, because DEI would be integrated into every aspect of our company culture, our functions, our values, our missions, our direction, our strategy, everything we're doing. But that's not the case. So sadly, it is a lot of lip service. And I think if you talk to more individuals who specifically work in that space on a regular basis, they'd be able to provide even more context about, sadly, how much lip service it just is.
Hmm. So then you're basically saying that the notion of woke capitalism is taking
Non-existent. Well, this is the bigger. So now we get into this deeper conversation, which is what we do when you and I talk, right?
right.
It's very, very difficult to talk about any social issue without also talking about the political issues, without also talking about the economic issues. Our social, political, and economic systems are completely intertwined. There's no way that we can ever address any of them independently. It just doesn't happen that way, because they're so intertwined and they're so codependent on each other. You know, when we talk about capitalism, what we're really talking about are the systemic things that have prevented other people from having access to capital. So if you're not a rich, white, straight, cisgendered, able-bodied, young, attractive male, you're having a little more challenge. You're having a few more challenges getting access to the capital that allows you to live and fulfill this idea, you know, the American dream of, we're supposed to be pursuing life, liberty, and happiness. Well, I can't pursue those things if I don't have access to those things. And not only I don't have access, there are systems and institutions and people that are actively preventing me from having access to those things. So it's very difficult to talk about any one of these structures or themes or ideas or concepts without literally addressing all of them simultaneously, which is why I do think it is so much more difficult.
So then, like you're saying, you know, you can't dismantle the master's house with the master's tools, right? And whatever kind of critique that one throws at, let's say, you know, Nike or any corporation, then they can say, all right, well then we'll take Kaepernick and we'll make you want to buy our product even more. And so the kind of the capitalist structure always has this weird way of taking what is popular and then making money off of it. And they're very good.
Welcome to the American way.
Yeah. Co-opting and then let's make money. So how did you pivot out of that world? And I sense and know that there's a tremendous grassroots desire in you that it's like, well, if these big corporations are not going to do the people work that I want to see done, I'm going to start my own podcast. I'm going to do my own thing, and I'm going to build my own, you know, kind of progressive empire here. So tell me a little bit about that.
Whew, again, yes, a lot of questions in one. I know, a lot of context. See, Zach, this is what happens. We get caught up. This is exciting. Yes, so a significant part of my professional background is working in the nonprofit sector. So I've worked for the direct services organizations. I've worked in video production. I've worked in policy, public policy, and having the opportunity, again, because I'm a server, I'm a community builder, I'm a people connector. And so I've always wanted to be of service to individuals and be of service specifically to those who don't have access, who don't have the microphone, who don't get the chance to tell their story and share their story and contextualize why they and how they've arrived at the situation that they're in. Because people didn't wake up and just be poor. People didn't wake up and just be hungry. They didn't wake up without a job. They didn't wake up, you know, fill in the blank with some colorful adjective of the American experience and how it isn't being afforded to everyone. So working in that nonprofit sector and working in that space very much also allowed me to understand the significant amount of also just inequity that exists there. You know, one of the biggest challenges I personally had, I had to have a come to Jesus moment, as they'll say. My first job out of school, I was working for a video production company. And this video production company was a nonprofit company who specifically worked with other nonprofit organizations to help tell their stories, help them develop grants so that they have some visual to complement, so that they can get more money, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. My come to Jesus moment occurred when I realized the office that I was working in, I was in DC at the time, the office I was in was in Georgetown. And the very communities that we were serving were very, very far away.
Mm.
The people who we were serving, the communities and the constituents that were benefiting from those organizations weren't even welcome in the office, in the city of the office in which I was working in.
Mm.
And that made me feel some kind of way.
Mm.
And that's when I had the transition and say, I got to do more on the ground work. And that's when I moved into direct services,
Mm.
doing direct services, working in, the marginalized communities within the DC area. And then getting there, a different set of challenges kind of arises. You also realize this, in that opportunity, I realized, wow, I'm on the ground engaging with our, clients on a regular basis.
Mm.
But in my office, I'm treated like a secondary citizen
Mm.
because I wasn't bringing in money. I wasn't on the development team raising money, right? And this is also in the backdrop of me being the only Black person in my office, the only gay person in my office, the only Black gay person in my office, right? And so all of this is going on internally and personally, which made me then realize this may not be the space for me.
Mm.
Which is when I moved into, public policy, moved to Pittsburgh, did a fellowship with the Coral Center for Civic Leadership. Amazing experience, wouldn't have changed it for the world. Came back and then worked with the Securities and Exchange Commission in DC.
Mm.
Getting into that space, a lot of the same challenges. It's bureaucracy. Again, this is the federal government. This is the same federal government that said that as a Black person, I would not be able to receive a loan to buy a home
Mm.
for 50 years.
Mm.
We call this redlining, right? It's the same federal government that does these things. The same federal government that says, if you want to receive assistance, woman, specifically Black woman, you cannot have a man in the house.
Mm.
Well, that destroys families. This is the same federal government. So it's all this introspective learning that very much I can only do it for so long before I'm like, I can't continue living like this.
Mm.
Which is when I decided to go to business school in Toronto, get those skills, develop that knowledge, and then realize I need to do something for myself, which is how, I fast forward after running a social club for gay men of color in Los Angeles, which is how I ended up at this podcast, where I want to talk to real people. And I talk to real people about real things, solving real issues. We're not going to solve these things over the course of our conversation. We're not going to solve anything, but you know what? We're going to start that conversation. We're going to get people to start thinking about what they do and how they're contributing to a lot of these issues that are going on in the world. I feel like I just went on a whole circle there. And I hope I addressed the initial question that was at hand, is how did we end up in this space?
Well, you did. I mean, something I really like about our conversations is you kind of peel back the layer and give a whole bunch of realness. And I think when talking about this kind of corporate spaces, woke capitalism, we also need to talk about queerness, which you've touched upon. What is the thing that mainstream corporations, mainstream America is missing about queerness, the LGBTQ plus movement? And is it just, it from my eyes, right, heterosexual, white, Jewish male guy, I'm seeing a desire to incorporate queerness into commercials and products and shows. But something you said to me that there's a hierarchy within, obviously, queer communities, and that you have a heavy distrust of white gay men. Tell us a little bit about what the woke media or woke capitalism is missing about queerness in this moment.
Totally. So this goes back to one of my favorite topics, which is intersectionality, right? For those of you who are listening who are unfamiliar with intersectionality, it's the idea that there are several identities that make up my one identity. And so it would be unfair and inaccurate to just look at me and be like, oh, or assume that I'm only experiencing the world as a Black person, or as a male, or as a gay person, or as fill in the blank with my other identities, whether that's my age, my sex, my gender, my sexuality, my religion. my ableism, my ability, et cetera, et cetera. So when I see the world, the main two lenses in which I see the world are as a Black gay man.
Mm.
And the way in which the world sees me and perceives me is as a Black man. When I'm walking down the street, that woman who crosses the street because she's afraid of me is not because I'm gay, because she probably doesn't know. She's responding to my Blackness. That person who locks their doors as I'm crossing the crosswalk, responding because of my Blackness.
Mm.
So I think we start there with the intersectionality, right? And so, and even contextualize that a little more as it relates to historical analysis. When we talk about some of the major social movements of the time, oftentimes we're only talking about those movements through the lens of one person's identity.
Mm.
When we talk about the women's movement, you're talking about a certain type of woman. You're talking about a middle-class white woman. Well, guess what? There are lots of other women out there that are not included in that in that women's movement, which is why there have been so many different waves of feminism,
Mm.
right? And what that means. When you're talking about, we use the idea of America. When someone says an American, you know who I see? It's not me. And I'm just as American as everyone else.
Mm.
It is some, New England white male with a sweater drawn over their shoulders, wearing khakis and boat shoes. That is the idea of an American in our mind. When we talk about Black Lives Matters,
Yeah.
what's oftentimes missing from that, even amongst the people, specifically Black people who are like, yes, my life matters, you're forgetting about the LGBTQ community and what that means. Because there's still Black people within this Black Lives Matter. It's like, no, Black people matter, but really they're implying that straight, heterosexual Black people matter, not anyone else who's outside of that. So let's start with that. So I think that's kind of the starting point.
Mm.
And so your question is really getting into, how did I arrive at this space of distrusting white men, white gay men in particular?
Mm.
For me, it's a very simple answer. Within the LGBTQ community, it is literally a microcosm of what is going on in our greater society.
Mm.
Even when we talk about the LGBTQ community, we're not talking about the LGBTQ community. We're talking about the G and the implicit W, which are the white gay men. We're not talking about lesbians. We're not talking about bisexual people or trans or queer or questioning, whatever the case may be. You're talking about white gay men, well-to-do white gay men.
Mm.
So, and so even just push that a little more, when we talk about even like the gayborhoods, these queer communities, they're gay bars. There are few spaces for lesbian women. There are few spaces for trans people. There are few spaces for bisexual people. There are few spaces for anyone who's not white and male.
Mm-hmm.
So I think once we understand that, and we understand that the LGBTQ community is literally just a microcosm of what's going on in the greater community, we see white gay men in particular wield their power in a way that still excludes other people, because at the end of the day, they're still white and they're still male. And so they still have that leg up, so to speak. They still have that privilege as it relates to the non-white and gay and male people within the LGBTQ space.
Mm. So you're taking the white gaze into a whole nother realm, right? You're saying the white gaze.
Well, the white gays, well, you know why? Because they even, again, take a step back, look at what we're talking about when we talk about the LGBTQ movement. When we're talking about same-sex marriage, who does that benefit?
Yeah.
Who does that benefit? That benefits the established, the wealthy, the middle class, white gay people. Because you know what? There are a significant number of LGBTQ people who are worried about where they're going to sleep tonight, what they're going to have to eat tomorrow, their families rejecting them, getting kicked out of their home, their mental health, access to drugs, and how that's destroying these spaces. But the greater LGBTQ movement is not taking that up. And we have to ask ourselves why. I know why. We won't talk about it because the why is that there are white gay men who are at the head and they are the face of this, LGBTQ movement. That is why those issues are not being taken up. That is why those issues are not being a priority in these spaces.
You are reminding me that there's a book that my actually our last guest Dr. Kalia Bradshaw talked about is Marriage for White People by Ralph Richard Banks. And yeah, I mean, if you think about it, marriage is a business contract.
Yes, absolutely.
It's a franchise in itself, right? You and I are going to go in on this together, and we're going to pay taxes together, or we're going to get a tax cut, and we are going to make a little corporation together. And what's mine is yours, and yours is mine, and let's pool our funds. So it's a little bit.
Which, for the record, is not a bad thing in and of itself. It's
Yeah.
not bad. I mean, we're still seeking to have those same rights because we deserve those economic benefits. We deserve that partnership. We deserve to be able to create that corporation for ourselves and pass that on to our pass that wealth on to our children and our loved ones.
Right.
My issue is that is the only lens, and that is the only issue that is taking precedence. What about all the other stuff that's going on? And I'm not saying, you know, these nonprofits, organizations, and other entities that are doing the work aren't doing work and aren't doing great work. That's fine and that's great. But there was so much money that was thrown behind campaigns to ensure that same-sex marriage equality was happening, that it was going to happen. That same type of money, that same type of support, those same types of resources are not available to all the other issues that are going on and plaguing the LGBTQ community. And we have to ask ourselves, why is that the case? That's really what it is. It's not an all or nothing. We can all win. This is not a zero-sum game. Right. We literally can all win. And even taking it out the context of LGBTQ folks, in capitalism says, in order for me to get something, you can't have something. We don't have to live this way. This doesn't have to be our truth.
So let's run with that. So I love it. So you're getting at the root of this stuff, which I think a lot of the problems in this country are a capitalist messed up thing with racial inequities, right? It's those two go hand in hand.
And I mean, and sexual, not just the racial. Like it's all of that, right? It's
right.
Not
sexual.
It's racial. It's racism. It's sexism. It's homophobia. It's Islamophobia. It's ageism. It's all of that that's intertwined. Sex and race, I think, are the easiest because they're the most visible. And so it's easier to discriminate and be like, you're this, you're that, you're not this, you're not that.
Right.
But yes, I just want to be clear because I think it's sometimes when we hear diversity and inclusion, people stop with, oh, there are Black people on the team, there are women on the team. It's so much more than that, folks. So I want to be clear and make sure we call that out.
No, you're right. You're right. And so, so Isabel Wilkerson has that new book about caste. So we're talking about a caste system here. And I heard something on the radio the other day, and I forgot who said it. But if we understand this caste, race, class, gender, capitalist cancer, and we've all identified it, how do we get folks to be surgeons, right? You've identified the cancer, but not everyone's going to become a surgeon. And the numbers aren't necessarily in our favor in terms of, you know, you got 200 million white folks, and some of them are progressives and are down for the cause, some aren't. You got 60 million Latinx folks in America. You got 40 million African American folks, and you got 20 million Asian American folks. And I don't even know the LGBT statistics, but Black Lives Matter is chipping away and getting some of those 200 million white folks onto the side of human rights. Let's call it what it is. How do you have somewhat of a tidal wave that we all become surgeons of this kind of capitalist cancer that is hurting all of us?
Yes, I think that's an incredibly tough question for a lot of reasons. But I'm going to start with as I talk about racism and sexism, right? For the record, people of color did not create racism. People of color do not benefit from racism. People of color do not perpetuate racism. White people created racism. White people benefit from racism. White people perpetuate racism.
You heard it here first. Yeah, no, go ahead.
Therefore, white people need to talk to white people about racism. Full stop. That is not my job. That is not my role. furthermore, it's incredibly exhausting to constantly be this voice of reason and trying to rationalize with someone who doesn't have a clear understanding of history, who doesn't understand how we've gotten to this point, who doesn't understand why things like affirmative action are beneficial and why it's necessary. I don't have the actual mental capacity for doing that because I'm constantly dealing with the ramifications of racism in our society on a regular basis. So, when we talk about racism in particular, we need white people to talk to white people about racism. You have the authority, you have the insight, and besides, they're going to listen to you more than they're going to listen to me. Because when I say it, I'm complaining. When you say it, it's like, huh, really? And the same thing happens when we talk about sexism. Women did not create sexism. Women do not perpetuate sexism. Women do not benefit from sexism. Men need to talk to men about sexism because men perpetuate it, men benefit from it. Men are the ones who are responsible for this horrible system. And again, if a woman can say the same thing, and I hear this all the time with clients, with peers, with friends, with family, women are in meetings, they'll say something. No one says anything, it's whatever. A male will say the exact same thing. And all of a sudden, it's a great idea, or the idea was heard, or it's moved forward, or whatever the case may be.
Yeah.
What are we talking about? Men need to talk to men about sexism, about their privilege being a male. White people need to talk to white people about their privilege being white people. And that is how we begin to dismantle this. And so, again, this goes back to this idea of our intersectional identities. We have so many different identities within ourselves. My role, my responsibility, I talk to other men about their misogyny. I talk to other men about their sexist ideas. I challenge other men and I call them out because I know it will be received in a way that it would not be received if a woman were to say the same thing. I talk to my middle class peers about their thoughts about why and how people do not have access to capital, why they're poor, why people are stealing, or whatever the case may be. That is my responsibility because that is a privilege that is afforded to me. So when I think about all these issues in which you make mention of, I have to think about the various parts of my own identity that I am privileged in. And I talk to those people and I engage with those people and I challenge those people on a regular basis because that's the only way that we're ever going to get here. But prior to that, as I shared with you earlier, unfortunately, Americans are not the brightest. You know, I don't want to call them dumb. I will call them lazy. But that's also because of our educational system, right? Our educational system was designed to get the results that we have. Full stop. It's not a surprise that people don't understand history. They don't understand social justice. Why, when you try to teach the ideas or you try to explain history in this country, it's considered anti-Americanism, anti-American. What are we talking about? There's, I mean, which we haven't even gotten into, but this idea, idea of exceptional, being an exceptional American, exceptionalism. Like, you can be exceptional and still acknowledge the facts and the history of this country, because we're never going to be able to actually move forward until we actually acknowledge what has happened, you know, which is why reparations is such a big thing as it relates to Black people. This country is yet to provide any type of economic support for literally freeing enslaved Black people in this country and just throwing them out and said, figure it out. And to the surprise of the powers of this country at that time, to the surprise of white people who wanted them to die, we are still here. We are still here. And not only are we still here, we're stronger, we're more resilient, we're more resourced, we're more equipped, we're all of those things. But this country's never actually provided any type of economic support behind that. As they continue to redline us for homes, as they continue not to fund the schools and communities that people that look like me, as they continue to prevent me from getting jobs and access to schools and education, et cetera, et cetera. So all of that starts with education. We have to be able to educate our students and citizens in accurate ways and comprehensive ways that really challenge them. You know, I hate that we have Betsy DeVoe making decisions right now. You know, she's leave it to her. She has, I believe it's in Texas, the Native Americans gave the Europeans their land because they asked for it. What are we talking about? That is not correct. That's actually a blatant lie. Oh, the black people decided they wanted to help the Europeans mill the land, tend to the land, and help them. No, no. But
Yeah.
again, we run into this idea of exceptionalism about being American.
Right.
Yes, you can be great and you can be wonderful, but also acknowledge this country has a very ugly history. It
Yeah.
has very big stains on it. And how
Right.
do we move forward from there?
Right. No,
Higher
100%.
education.
No, 100%. I mean, I consider myself an educated guy, and my public school teaching and also my Hebrew school teaching never taught me that certain Jewish folks got reparations, including my grandmother, to the tune of like $300 a month from the West German government after World War II because of the Holocaust. But that Black folks, Native American folks, certain,
Japanese got it.
Japanese got it, right? $20,000 lump sum in 1987. Yeah, so the reparations discussion is just tragic. I mean, that needs to be worked on and immediately. The U.S. government apologized for slavery in 2008, but had no money attached to it. Which,
and I don't care about your apology, which is the same thing that these
yeah.
corporations do whenever they do something foolish.
Right.
Oh, I'm sorry. I don't care about you being sorry. What does your board of directors look like?
Right.
Who's on your leadership team? What's the pipeline to leadership?
Mhm.
Those are the things that matter. Don't give me an apology.
Mm.
And don't tell me that you hired more people. That's great and wonderful. I want people on these teams that have power and can leverage and wield that power for more positive impact and more positive change.
Mhm.
That token person does not count.
Mhm. Mhm.
Those token people do not count.
Right. So let's jump into that. So the media gets all excited and frustrated about defund the police. And you and I were saying, well, we've been defunding education for the last 50 years and no one got really upset about it because it was like, well, it's for those folks, even those poor whites, right? We're fine with that. But we've been defunding education for so long. And there's a lot of, public, private, charter school teachers on the call today. What would you say that they can do in their classrooms with their students to teach about these issues? And the more I'm listening to you, the more I'm realizing, teaching the history that you and I are very passionate about is step one. That's just like basic, right?
I mean, that's probably step two. Step one is actually knowing that history exists.
Even better.
Right? Knowing that it exists and then being able to want to teach. But please, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, correct. And as I'm hearing you talk about kind of the business world, we are talking about like history mixed with ethics / morality, mixed with how to do social change on a large and micro level. Do we need classes in high school, middle school, in college that are teaching people how to promote folks in a business, how to create business plans that are inclusive, how to create things that actually help dismantle some of this cancer that we're seeing?
You know the answer to this, Zach. You know the answer to this. Absolutely. I mean, there are kind of two things here. There's so many things that I want to share, but I feel like I hope listeners are not lost. And my thoughts are just like boom, boom, boom. Where are we going? Where are we going? What's next? So again, you want to hear some more actually controlled and focused content, listen to my podcast, Reset, Rethink with Anthony Mecca, which is pretty awesome because we
Really
talk
dope.
about these things.
I was on it. Very dope.
Yes, Zach was. It was
Yeah.
really great. That you asked, do our educational systems, do whether it's K through 12 or higher education, 100%. I mean, without jumping into the big conversation of how effective our educational system or ineffective it actually is, the curriculum that, I'm not an educator, so please push back and correct me if I'm incorrect, but by and large, the curriculum in which our students are learning, specifically K through 12 students are learning, that has largely been unchanged for the past 60, 70 years. it hasn't accounted for our evolution as it relates to knowledge, acquiring knowledge, technology, innovation, practicality, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I went to a public institution for K through 12. I was always in a public school. I went to a magnet, I was always in magnet program.
Mm.
And I was afforded things that the people who were not in magnet never had the opportunity to do.
Mm.
But then I look at my peers who went to private schools and I'm like, wow, didn't even know that was possible for a 10th grader, for an 8th grader. So it's definitely requires us to look at this large, great curriculum and really, gosh, how do I say? I want to say it's beyond just because I know oftentimes educators their hands are tied.
Mhm.
Right? Like you have to adhere to what's going on in your district and what's going on in your school and then whatever team and department you're in. I understand that. How do we create alternative spaces that allow us to provide this education and this history and this knowledge that is necessary? And I specifically talk about history in particular because we're going to continue to repeat the mistakes of the past until we understand the past
Mm.
and we reconcile with the past.
Mm.
And on a super granular, I can't speak apparently, level is a lot of the schools here, at least in my community where I grew up, these middle schools and high schools are are named after old presidents
Right.
and or old people who were just horrible humans, whether they were actual slave owners or they were assaulting women or genocide against the natives or fill in the blank with some colorful ugly atrocity from the past. We don't even think about that when we send our kids to schools,
Mm.
right? And if we understood history, maybe we would actually be up in arms that your school is named after George Washington
Mhm.
or
Mhm.
named after John Adams.
Mhm.
Because you know what they don't have in Germany? They don't have an Adolf Hitler middle school. I promise you.
Yep.
Right? So I just
Yep.
want us to
Yep.
there's so many different ways to go, but I think the history is one of them, and just understanding that and also being much more practical. Like it's 2020, everyone's at home right now.
Yeah. I
There
know.
are a lot of people who don't even have access to computers. They don't have access to technology. How are they learning?
Right. What? Yeah. Right. How are they learning? You touched on something that. Okay. Would there have been something impactful for you as like a young person? I mean, you're still young.
Thank you.
But like as a kid, would there have been a class or a teacher or a mentor or whatever or a curriculum that could have been about social entrepreneurship or something, so you didn't have to like go through all that not so happy experience in corporate America? Like, what, for the teachers listening, like what could that have looked like to, I don't want to say shorten that journey, but maybe shorten that period of like exploration where it's like you could have just honed in on the social entrepreneurship, and even now that you find yourself in that space, from our conversations, sometimes it sounds kind of lonely, and maybe it'd be nice to have some people that were like people with power that were like really doing this stuff alongside you.
Is there something that could have changed that or help that or expedite the process or minimize that journey of hurt and pain, confusion,
Mm.
lostness, I made up a word. Yes, there is. Again, I'll go back to specifically my high school experience. I went to humanities magnet. So we were studying Thoreau and Descartes and, existentialism, et
Mm.
cetera, et cetera.
Mm.
But also part of this experience is it was our 11th grade year where we spent an entire year understanding social justice issues,
Mm.
and two books that really stood out to me, that prepared me, at least, it gave me the foundation, gave me the language to be able to talk about these things. Because oftentimes these things happen and we're just like, I know that happened, but I don't know if it was racist or sexist, but it happened. And people say, oh, it never happened to me. No, you may not have had the knowledge. You may not have had the knowledge or the language to describe how this happened. But two books that stand out to me were, one, Dr. Beverly Tatum's Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together in the Cafeteria? The book chronicles the journey of racial identity and why it's so important and why it becomes so imperative at the specific moments in our lives. And up to that point, I can describe when something feels uncomfortable and it's horrible and this, that, and the other. But did I have the exact language to describe that to someone who doesn't understand that, who doesn't feel and know when you walk into a clothing store that a security guard starts following you, or when you're checking out at the grocery store and you use your credit card and they ask you for 2 forms of ID when you see the person in front of you didn't have to do the same, you know? So it's getting that language that was important for me. And so I think, one, there was that book, but also one of my favorite books as well, A People's History of the United States by Howard Zinn. And Howard Zinn tells the story of the United States from the non-straight, white, wealthy, cis male perspective. So we hear the perspective and the history of natives, of laborers, of women, of children, of Black people, of LGBTQ people, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that's probably the first starting point in terms of preparing me, being able to have that language to understand that. I think in terms of social entrepreneurship, I think our curriculum would have to be, again, kind of adjusted in its entirety. We have to create more spaces for practical knowledge that is relevant in today's society. I took geometry. I've never written a proof after 10th grade. Why? I have my MBA from the University of Toronto. I didn't study proofs. You know, I didn't study the Pythagorean theorem. I didn't study calculus. I learned real practical things about business, about life, about how decisions are made. We need to be teaching students how to write checks, how to open a bank account, how to invest, how to buy a home, why credit is important. Like very practical things for life, and complement that with history, complement that with writing, complement that with mathematics, with reading and science, for sure. But some of the stuff, I haven't, cared about chemistry since high school, but I had to take it and it was a requirement. So what does that look like? Would there have been something that could help prepare me for the social entrepreneurship? You got to understand people. You got to understand history, because from there, then you can go ahead and support other people.
Yeah, no, I like that idea of teaching students, how to invest, right? And how to open up a bank account. And it's funny because we're both critiquing capitalism, but it's what we live in, right? And if it's either sink or swim, and if you don't get on board and you try to do something with it, you're going to be killed by it. I read an article today in the New York Times about what do they call it?
And Zach, I'm listening to you. I realize my charger is not plugged in, so I'm just
go. It was this article that was about very wealthy millennials that were white and that understand the problems that we're talking about. And they are creating funds to redistribute their wealth. And this was a really interesting idea because we're always talking about those that have should give. And so now you have a lot of wealthy millennials that are inheriting. This one guy was inheriting $100 million from his parents, and he wants to give it to redistribute it to Native American lands. He wants to redistribute it as reparations for Black folks. And so what does it mean when you have, I guess this has always been the story of America, but you have wealthy individuals that have a moral compunction, have a interest and understanding of this cancer that we've been talking about, of a caste system in America. And they are doing the role that a government is supposed to be doing. But there's only this amount of good-hearted, rich folks that are giving away their money. And there's this amount of folks that are, whatever, either buying a new yacht or giving their money to the Koch brothers, giving it to political organizations that are going to give them a tax cut. So I don't know. How do we,
Reconcile those ideas.
yeah, what's the future forward? I mean, so we're talking about it's in the education, it's in the classroom. It's obviously hitting some of these white millennials, right? Because they're interested in giving back. But how do we really get the governmental structures to change, kind of like it did in the 30s for right? The New Deal helped poor white folks. It didn't help Black and brown folks that much. But how do we get back to something like that?
I think that's
Do it right, and do it right for, to
well,
include.
I think it goes back to a lot of what we were talking about earlier in understanding history. Like you just said, the government should be doing these things. Well, let's take a step back for a second and talk about the government. Millennials are the second largest voting demographic, maybe the largest compared to baby boomers. I don't know what year we're supposed to be larger than them. How many millennials are represented in the United States Congress?
Right.
How many millennials are represented there? Very few. It's not reflective of our demographics, As you said earlier, Black people are 13% of the United States population. How many are represented in Congress? Women are 50% of our population. How many are represented in Congress?
Right.
The system is the problem.
Yeah.
The system is the issue. We're just now, it's so mind blowing to me that as Vice President-elect Biden and Madam Vice President-elect Harris are deciding on people in their cabinet that they're still a first this, a first that, a first that. And I'm like, how is this possible in 2020 in what is supposed to be the greatest country in the world?
Yeah.
How is that happening?
We're exceptional.
We're incredibly exceptional. Like, this is ridiculous. So you ask that question, and also that's one kind of response I want to give. The other part is these wealthy white people have to talk to other wealthy white people. The reason why millennials, I do use that example, I believe truly the reason why millennials are apt to do it right now, and what I think Gen Zers and those who come after them will also be more in tune with that. We have so many different outlets for actually learning about history, about education, about putting information out there, that it's going to become very difficult to ignore.
Yeah.
Everything that happened over the summer with the Black Lives Matter protests, Black people getting killed by the state is not new at all.
Right.
What is new is leveraging technology to show other people what that looks like. Leveraging social media, having non-Black people and allies in that work, in that space, stand up and be like, yo, this is happening, we need to do something. That wasn't new. But again, it was those white people, those allies, those non-Black people who stood up and said, we're going to do something. So what does that look like? I don't want to sound incredibly radical. I am in some ways, but these systems don't work for us. They were never intended to work for us. When we talk about the writers of the Constitution, they didn't look like me. They didn't look like you.
It's true.
You know what I mean? And so when you tell me one part that I'm a 3/5 human, in one part of my history, people that look like me were considered property. We had to fight for the right to vote. Women had to fight for the right to vote. Poor people had to fight for the right to vote. What are we talking about? The system is inherently bad. And so I think it's oftentimes, let's get inside the system and let's change it from the inside. And then you can kind of sort of not really, because the roots are bad. We have bad roots. We don't have bad branches. We don't have bad leaves. We have bad roots.
That's true.
So again, it also, I don't want to, kind of fall back on this really sad and negative note, but something drastically has to change if we're truly committed to the idea of creating a just and equitable world for all of us to survive and thrive in. I don't want to just survive.
Right.
Because that's what a lot of people are just doing. They're just surviving. That's not a healthy life. I want to thrive. I want to be happy. I want to be joyful. And I can't do that if the government constantly has its foot on my neck, physically and metaphorically.
Right. No, 100%. You know, we got to get out of here in about 5 minutes. Um, what's your message to K through 16 educators in terms of any of the topics that we've touched upon? What do you want K through 16 educators to know and to bring into their classrooms, their administrative spaces? What's your message to them?
Ooh, such a big question. I wasn't ready for this. My message to educators, I just want to say thank you, first off, for being an educator. I think educators are the most underappreciated asset in our society. I don't think they get the love, the respect, the dignity that they deserve.
Mm.
Educators are truly, they are, you all are literally angels on earth. You know, without you, there could be no one I wouldn't be able to exist. I wouldn't be here
Mm.
without the many educators who, you know, took the time with me, who called on me, who engaged with me, whatever the case may be. So I think just number one, just thank you for your service, because it is a thankless job. And it's unfortunate that it's a thankless job, because you are so incredibly important and such an asset.
Mm.
But as I play that back in my mind, I would encourage educators to, I want to say, challenge the status quo.
Yeah.
Just a little bit. And I say that in the respect that as decisions are being made about how students are learning, how you have to teach them, the curriculum that's being decided, when you're deciding whether you should be teaching Helen Keller or, you know, another white man from history that had done the same thing or something similar, or that who's insignificant relative to other individuals.
Mhm.
I would encourage you to continue challenging those things. Push for change. We already know that the system has not been created to be the most equitable and the most equal, and to provide the most comprehensive, you know, educational experience for our students.
Mm.
I would challenge you to push that.
Mm.
Push for the desire for change, and not just change for a curriculum or a class or a year, but long-term sustainable change, because we would truly be doing ourselves a disservice if we don't continue to educate our students who become adults, who become citizens, who become voting citizens. We're doing them a disservice if they don't understand how they've got to this very moment.
Right.
And so, out sounding super crazy,
Mm.
I would highly encourage you all to push for change, meaningful, long-term, sustainable change,
Mm.
because your voice matters. You can do it. And again, we wouldn't be here without amazing educators.
I love it. Yeah, no, I love it. It's kind of like the hug sandwich. It's like, I love you. Please do a little better and do this. I love it. I love it. That's
It's true. It's true.
you're on your way to political diplomat here. I love it.
No.
Um, so we gotta go. But how can people follow you? How can people know about?
Oh, yes. So there are a couple of ways. One, I encourage you to check out all my wonderful thoughts. My wonderful guests, actually. I just help facilitate it. I host a podcast, as I shared earlier, called Reset Rethink with Anthony and Mecca. And what it is, we talk about these political and cultural challenges in our society with real people in real time who are doing the real work. So I encourage you to check us out on Apple Music, Spotify, wherever you listen to your podcast. Reset Rethink with Anthony and Mecca. Um, we're also on Twitter, Reset Rethink. I highly encourage you to also check out my website, anthonymecca.com, less because of me, but to see a lot of the work that I've done, and how I can potentially help you. Again, I am a consultant. I build communities. I connect people. That is what I do. That is what I love doing. It is a passion of mine. And, you know, I can refer you to some happy clients if you want a referral.
I love it. I love it. Well, look, man, thank you for coming on the show. Thank you, Joe Brooks and CWI, for
Yes.
always making things happen. And have a beautiful rest of your Sunday, and let's educate, liberate, and inspire. And thanks for
Yes,
doing the work that
yes.
you do.
Thank you so much, Zach, for having me. This has been incredible. Thank you, Joe. Thank you, CWI. And we'll be in touch.
All right.
All right.
Thank you. Take
Take
care.
care.
Bye.
Cheers.